Hello and welcome to an impromptu video on the channel. Wasn't planning on doing one today, but some breaking news as Amanda Staveley, Newcastle's minority stake owner, has decided to leave the club. Vacating her 6% ownership of the club will either go to the PIF or the Rubens that we sold to one of those, and that's been decreasing ever since the takeover. Really, it was 10% back then. It's decreased over recent times, and that kind of suggests that maybe we were heading for this all along. It's puzzling though, because she was the face of the club. She was the face of the ownership, the takeover at the Liverpool game in October 2017. Then she made bids for the club as PCP Capital Partners, and then she brought the Saudi PIF to the table, and that's when the takeover eventually happened. All off her own back, and I think it's really interesting to see where the club goes from here in terms of finding that new face. In practical terms, I don't think much will change, because the role she took on in 2021 initially, when the club was very skeletal, there was no board members, no chief executive in place beyond Lee Charnley, certainly no football operation in place. So she had to do a lot of that herself. She was taking up a lot of the roles that have since been taken up by Darren Eales, Peter Silverstone, and recently, as I've discussed on the channel, Paul Mitchell's come in as sporting director. Dan Ashworth was there as well, and then you've got Eddie Howe as well. So there's no real cause for her to take up any of these roles anymore. I think just purely in terms of the enthusiasm and the reason why Newcastle United are no longer owned by Mike Ashley, the majority of that comes down to Amanda Staveley. She was the one who was interested in the club. She had meetings with Rafa Benitez's people early on with the suggestion that when, and talking back in 2017, that they would have worked together, and that was a lot of initially Frank McParland, who worked with Rafa Benitez, came in as a recruitment help for Staveley and the ownership in the early days of the takeover. So there was a lot of connection to that version of Newcastle, and I think that had it happened, when Staveley initially wanted it to, when Benitez was still in charge, it would look very different, and PIF would be at this stage. So very, very interesting to see what's happened. As I say, practical terms, I'm not really sure anything will change. The jobs have been filled by people who have brilliant track records. You've got Mitchell with Tottenham and Leipzig and Monaco. You've got Silverstone working at Arsenal. You've got Atlanta United and Spurs on Darren Eales' CV as well. There's plenty of great stuff there that suggests that this is still a very serious project. But all of the reason why this has happened is now leaving the building because Staveley's going. So there's a void to be filled there. The fans have that connection. They built the connection with her, and then everything sort of followed since. And I think that now it'll be interesting to see who fills her role, if there's another board member gets appointed, whether there's going to be somebody who's going to operate things from the UK, because that's kind of, we talked about Dan Ashworth leaving because of frustrations with the situation of having to wait to go to PIF, wait for an okay from Saudi Arabia. Is that part of the situation? At this point, I certainly don't know. It's not been divulged. I've asked the club today, got a hard no comment, and I don't imagine that there'll be much beyond a statement to announce it when it does get confirmed, to explain why, certainly initially, possibly at all, and that leaves a big void, because not only for popularity and face with the fans, but also sense that there's an operation happening in the UK. And will this sort of having to wait for Saudi Arabia to come to the table a little bit more be very pertinent? There's been no real development in terms of the training ground. There's been no real development in terms of plans for the stadium as well. There is a possibility that this could be quite a big story if you look at it like that. But in terms of the everyday running of the club, absolutely no real surprise here. Because of her decreasing stake, as I say, it was 10% down to 6%. That'll now be sold off to either the Rubens or PIF. But between Yasser Al Rumayyan only came across for the odd game. Jamie Rubin is visible alongside Staveley, but if anyone ever really spoke, it was usually Staveley to the press, and she was very vocal with the fans as well, and very visible with the fans. There's got to be a bridge, whether that's Eales, whether that's Mitchell, who knows? And there's obviously lots of question marks about the structure of this club now because Staveley's left. I do think that is very, very genuine. I don't think that this is something you can just brush under the carpet purely because the club does have a structure in place. She had a contract to run the club. As I said in a Q&A video back in December, when Eddie Howe's future was under scrutiny, ultimately the decisions were going to lay with Piff, and that was always going to be the case. So with that in mind, the structure won't change, but it's just that face of it and just the whole the way that the club has been run, and she was the one who was visible. And I think that does need to be replaced, because we've seen with other clubs, particularly with Newcastle in the past, when managers under Mike Ashley were the only ones to ever speak, that didn't help with the connection to the city and the club. And I think that is very much what makes Newcastle tick. Staveley, to her credit, she absolutely understood that. She made that work, and she was the one who brought the takeover to fruition, and she deserves massive credit for that. Her and Mehrdad Ghodoussi, her husband, their involvement with Newcastle is now severed. She was the one who was enthusiastic about this project. She was the one who was driving it. She was the one talking about competing with Manchester City in 5 years and PSG in 5 years, win the Champions League and the Premier League in 10 years and all that sort of thing. That call came from her on the night of the takeover. The only real comment on that we've had is on the documentary from Yasser Al-Rahman, who says he wants to be number one. There isn't really a tangible plan that we're seeing in place to see where that goes. I do think that there will be some questions to be answered over the next few weeks. We obviously see that Paul Mitchell will get to work on. Obviously, the club, as I've stated, will run itself absolutely fine, provided that there's a good link between Piff and the UK. But this isn't a surprise. Ultimately, it's I can understand why some fans would be disappointed, because Staveley is the reason why everything was so positive in the first place. She also played a crucial role in that first 18 months. She helped build a skeletal club from the ground. As I say, she took over when Steve Bruce was in charge and Lee Charnley was in charge, and that was it. And then she was the commercial officer, she was the CEO, she was a de facto director of football, doing a lot of negotiations with players. And that sort of momentum that she built, I did a reaction podcast on the True Faith Patreon, so if you're able to listen to that, go and do so. But she was the one who built that sort of momentum and helped build that momentum with the sort of the positivity that she had for the club in that first 18 months, and the way she was very visible helped spur the club, or help move the club on. We look at the PSR thing. We said that the club needs to answer questions. There's more questions to be answered, and I do think that this could be quite a big story if left to fester, because the situation is so unpredictable now. In terms of the structure of the club, it'll survive. There are people in every position to make decisions. It's just about what PIF want. I said on that instant reaction, if you look at Manchester City, the Abu Dhabi United group's main focus is the City group, with City at the top of that tree. Other clubs like Girona and Troyes are part of that as well. Whereas the Saudi PIF, they've got a lot of sporting plates to spin. They've got the golf, the Live Golf, they've got the F1, and they've got the Saudi Pro League. And I've long suspected within myself that the Saudi Pro League is their main thing, and that's what they really want to grow. Obviously, having a Premier League club and having a successful Premier League club is beneficial to them. I don't think they're going to go anywhere. I just think that there's some questions to answer about the future of the club, because Staveley was very much the face of it, and she was the one who brought this all together. And now she's gone, what happens next? I think that is a very, very valid question. Thanks very much for joining me on this impromptu video. I've got a very, very special NUFC Thursday show planned. Check out that at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. It'll not be at 5 o'clock because it's very, very special. Recording it later today, so do check that out. Continue to like, share and subscribe. Let's get to 500 subscribers before the start of the new season, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.